Hey everybody, I got a video here for you today. Now I have talked a lot about the 18th dynasty pharaohs. This was the most glorious time of ancient Egypt, and I believe these were the most famous pharaohs from ancient Egypt. I believe a lot of their life stories were taken for the foundation of the stories of the biblical Old Testament heroes. But this here is Hatshepsut, the fifth king of the 18th dynasty, and one of the most famous pharaohs from this time. And what makes the story of Hatshepsut more remarkable is that she is a woman, and she appointed herself pharaoh, and around at the age of 22 years of age. This must have been an incredibly strong woman, and I'm going to read a little bit about the story of Hatshepsut, and I will leave these links below. It says, although not the only female ruler of Egypt, Hatshepsut is one of the best known next to Cleopatra. She was an 18th dynasty pharaoh, daughter of Thutmose I and Ahmes. When her father died, her half-brother Thutmose II ascended to the throne. He was young, apparently younger than Hatshepsut herself. The Egyptian tradition of having the pharaoh marry a royal woman led to Thutmose II to marry Hatshepsut. The women in Egypt carried the royal blood, not the males. To become pharaoh, the man had to marry a female of royal blood, often a sister or half-sister or a near relative. Usually it was the eldest daughter of the previous pharaoh. Thutmose II died soon after becoming pharaoh, leaving the widow Hatshepsut a daughter and a son by another wife who was Thutmose III. Due to the young age of the pharaoh, and Thutmose III was only about 10 or 12 at this time, it says, due to the young age of the pharaoh, Hatshepsut became his regent. They ruled together for a number of years until she proclaimed herself pharaoh. Perhaps when Thutmose III was reaching manhood, something almost unheard of despite the higher status of women in Egypt compared to women in other cultures at the time. Women could own land, inherit from other family members, and could even court to defend her rights. But before Hatshepsut, there were queens who had ruled Egypt, but not a female pharaoh. She managed to rule for about 20 years before disappearing into history, coinciding with Thutmose III becoming pharaoh in his own right. Jumping over to this website here, it says this. The marriage of Thutmose II with Hatshepsut produced no sons, but Thutmose had a secondary wife named Isis who produced a son also called Thutmose. He was crowned as Thutmose III and was destined to be one of the greatest of all pharaohs, but he was only about 12 years of age when his father Thutmose II died, so Hatshepsut assumed the role of regent on his behalf. It says Hatshepsut ruled as regent for about 7 years, but she apparently liked the job because she then assumed the title of king. She may have been no more than 15 years of age when her husband died, and 22 when she proclaimed herself to be the pharaoh. This was indeed a bold step for a young woman of 22 years of age, although it was not a sudden coup, but probably a gradual assumption of office. And that was one thing smart she did. She kind of gradually assumed these male roles in Egypt. She didn't do it all at once. She didn't come in like a ball of fire. She seemed to be very smart, as well as strong-willed. But it says this, of course, required some justification. And we find on the walls of Hatshepsut's beautiful mortuary temple at Del El Bahri a wall relief depicting her as being born of the god Amun, who appoints her as the future ruler of Egypt. And this was a common theme of these 18th dynasty rulers. They made up these stories, or had stories written, that the gods appointed them to be ruler of Egypt. And this is the nativity scene of Amenhotep III at Luxor, and this is basically the same story as the birth of Christ in the chapter of Luke in the Gospel. It says, in this picture we have the Annunciation, the Conception, the Birth, and the Adoration, just as described in Luke's Gospel. And this comes from a period about 1,500 years before the same story is used for Jesus. But this is a common theme in the 18th dynasty. You remember Thutmose IV made up the story of God, the Sphinx, talking to him and appointing him king of Egypt. But I just wanted to point that out. I made a video about that once, and I'll leave a link below. But getting back to this here, about this temple inscription that justifies Hatshepsut becoming pharaoh. It says, whatever the motive in this inscription, it depicts a touching scene with the description of the supposed bedroom meeting between Hatshepsut's mother and the god Amun. And it says this, she smiled at his majesty. He went to her immediately. She was filled with joy at the sight of his beauty. His love passed into her limbs. The palace was flooded with the god's fragrance, and all his perfumes were from Punt. The idea that Amun had occupied the body of Thutmose I to impregnate his queen. It says the reliefs then go on to depict the royal birth with the queen seated on the birth stool in the presence of gods who rejoice at this auspicious birth. The babe, who is depicted as a mature child, is then presented to her father as the future heir to the throne. There is, however, some gender confusion. The child is clearly shown as a male. Hatshepsut at no time pretended to be male, though she did assume all the titles of a king and is depicted wearing the ceremonial royal beard. And it says, some may regard it as ludicrous that a woman should boast a beard, but most Egyptians were clean-shaven. The pharaohs strapped a false beard onto their chins for royal or ceremonial occasions, and Hatshepsut apparently reasoned that if men could do it, so could she. So she was strong-willed, she had an attitude, and that is very apparent in these stories. But it mentions Punt, and the Egyptians were taking sea voyages to a land called Punt at her time, and it is depicted on the walls of her temple. It says this voyage to Punt, also known as Godland, was a key to foreign relations. And it says the depiction of Punt at the Del El Bahri temple shows scenes of the Puntite village with conical reed-built huts built on poles above the ground, entered via ladders. Shaw writes, adding that palms and myrrh trees can be seen. The ruler of Punt is distinguished from the Egyptians primarily by his beard and unusual costume, and his wife is depicted as an extremely obese woman. But I will leave the link to this. It tells of Egyptian sea voyages from about 3,600 years ago. And on this website here, this is the Temple of Hatshepsut at Luxor. It's a beautiful temple, and this goes over her temple, shows pictures, goes over the history of the temple. But I definitely had to include that because it is a very cool, famous temple from ancient Egypt. And this article here talks about the reign of Hatshepsut, and it talks about her high priest, who is named Senenmut, and it talks about a little confusion in ancient history. Maybe Senenmut was wielding a lot of this power as her high priest, and it talks about a book being written, and it sums it up this way. It says, justifiably, Joyce, and this talks about an author, justifiably, Joyce rejects this concept of Senenmut wielding a lot of the power. It says, by any standards, Hatshepsut was a remarkable character, an obviously strong-minded woman who, even in her early 20s, showed amazing initiative and resolution. She rose above the limitation Egyptian society would have normally imposed on her and became not just the greatest woman that Egypt ever saw, but one of the most successful monarchs that ever sat upon the throne of the pharaohs. So I will leave all these links below. This talks of Hatshepsut, a very remarkable young woman. When she came to power, she named herself Pharaoh. I will leave all these links below. I just think this is a fascinating story, thought I would share, and I hope you thought this was interesting. Have a nice day.